Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Legend Quest Omnibus Edition. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review featuring this classic fantasy tabletop RPG, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about combat rounds and weapons. When a character engages in combat for an extended period of time, fatigue may set in. This is controlled by the character's combat rounds. Unlike other role-playing games, combat rounds here represent a measurement related to fatigue. A character's combat rounds are computed by adding the character's strength minus the strength needed on the weapon to the character's endurance. If the character is wearing armor, the armor's attribute reduction or AR is also subtracted, modified by the character's total amount of appropriate armor skill levels. A character may never receive additional rounds due to armor skill levels. In other words, even if the character's armor skill levels are higher than the attribute reduction, the rounds modifier for armor is 0. It sounds complicated, but it's very simple. Combat rounds equals endurance plus the resulting value of strength minus the strength needed to use the weapon, minus the resulting value of the attribute reduction minus the armor levels. Every round in which the character attacks, the character's combat rounds are reduced by 1. If the character remains in combat after his or her combat rounds have reached 0, the character will lose 3 fatigue points at the end of every turn. If a character's maximum combat rounds are less than 1, the character will lose fatigue points during every turn of combat. 1 combat round will be regained for every turn of inactivity, up to the character's maximum. If a character switches weapons during combat, the character uses the lower maximum rounds for calculating when fatigue will begin. Any turn in which the character attacked, parried and/or dodged is considered to have been a combat round. Melee, range, and artillery combat are all affected by combat rounds. Spellcasting, mentalism, first aid, senses, etc. are not considered combat, but neither are they resting. However, reloading a weapon is considered to be a combat action. There is an optional rule here. Holding an action is still considered an action when computing combat rounds, so each turn in which a character is holding an action either reduces the available combat rounds or causes 3 fatigue points. The exception to this is crossbows. Let's talk about weapons. There are various weapons used in combat. Each of these weapons have several different characteristics that are defined by these statistics. You have details on the various groupings of weapons, the damage multiplier, the strength needed to wield such a weapon. That is, the strength needed for a melee weapon controls the amount of damage you are able to deal with that weapon. To effectively cause the damage the weapon was intended to do, the wielder must have a strength equal to the strength needed number, obviously. If the wielder's strength is less than the strength needed, the damage multiplier is reduced by 1 step. So you can barely swing the weapon, you can barely lift it. The strength needed for a ranged weapon affects the accuracy of the weapon. If the character does not have the strength needed for the weapon, the chance of success is decreased 10% for every point of strength lacking. There is also an optional rule. Because of the physics of surface area of piercing versus slashing weapons, you may wish to increase the piercing weapon damage to represent this. The number of hands in the statistics of the weapon of course indicates how many hands are needed to use the weapon. It is possible to use a two-handed weapon in one hand, if the character has the physical size to make this possible. When using two-handed weapons with one hand, the strength needed of the weapon increases by 3. Conversely, if a person uses 2 hands on a one-handed weapon, they effectively increase their strength by 1 point. You also have details on the initiative modifier, which is applied to the character's initiative when the weapon is employed. You also have parry and dodge modifiers, the cost of the weapon, the throwing modifier, the range. It is all quite logical. And this concludes this part of the review. In the next part we are going to talk about fighting styles, as well as wild firing and special circumstances. This game is a true delight for those that want to simulate those nuances of combat, those finer points. At first, you need to understand the formula employed. But once you get the hang of it, it's going to flow quite smooth. You don't need to rush things, but you can write down these values beforehand on your character sheet, of course. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. And remember, it is better to roleplay and fail in character than not to roleplay and fail as a player. Once again, thank you, and see you later.